So we just got done playing a metric ton of Street Fighter 2 games beyond the World Warrior. And it's interesting to see when you see things happen slowly, right? What changes, what develops, what gets us to the eventual really good Street Fighter games. And in my opinion, the best ones were Hyper Fighting. Wow, Sonic Boom into Flash Kick. Cool. Oh my God, you piece of shit. Your fake ass charges. I can't do any of the combos against the computer. I just won't be able to. I just won't be able to. Computer is walking forward and flash kicking me. It's being unapologetic now. Back in the day, the Xbox 360 version was great. That's where I learned how to play Hyper Fighting. And then the eventual Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. But we're not getting all the way to Super Turbo for the sake of this playthrough and run. The reason being is that Super Turbo has been remade like 4 or 5 times, and that'll be really fascinating to see how many different versions of that game exist. So we started at the beginning, and it's solving one of the most confusing things that exists with the old Street Fighter 2 versions, and the old Street Fighter 2 versions have so many weird names and nicknames. I was trying to remember, which did I play on the Genesis? Was it Champion Edition? Was it Championship Edition? It's like, oh, no, it wasn't. It was Street Fighter 2 Special Champion Edition. I'm like, oh, well, sick. So, but wait a minute. I remember, right, Street Fighter 2 Turbo. And I also remember in the arcade, there was regular Champion Edition. And I also remember Street Fighter 2 Hyper Fighting. And then, wait a minute, but there's also arcade machines that have Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition Turbo Hyper Fighting presented by Capcom, and we have reached absolute meme status. This is where all the old jokes come from. Capcom was absolutely shitting out versions of Street Fighter 2, going up until the point where they would make Super Turbo. And all these versions essentially collect around the 1992 to 1993 range, where there's just a ton of friggin' games that exist in this time frame. So the ones that I want to check out, the ones that I want to go over is obviously Champion Edition, which is a game that has just the bosses and no other huge changes, right? There's no speed changes to that one. And then you get Turbo, which is technically Hyper Fighting, which has the bosses, which has, you know, the ability to fight against clone characters. You can actually finally fight against clone characters and stuff and get new costumes, or at least one extra color. But the game is significantly different in speed and a lot saucier. And then obviously we get to Super Street Fighter 2, the new challengers, and there's a bit more cohesion there where things just make a lot more sense. So starting off with Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition. And after playing this version, I feel like a lot of people have a lot of memories of Champion Edition being great. I remember it being called Championship Edition, so I don't know where the hell my brain is going. Hey, stop throwing those. Stop throwing the low ones, man. Yeah, damn straight. No victories for anybody. Funny enough, upon revisiting now, dude, this game is bare bones as hell. Champion Edition is very minor gameplay changes, and you get the bosses. So you get to fight the 4 kings of Claw, Dictator, Sagat, and Boxer, and they're just busted. They put so little actual balancing effort into it that it feels like the ones that I played, especially like Bison. Oh my God, dude, he's just... Anybody got a combo that I can do? Who needs a combo? He's got combos for years. He's got restuns. He's got just insane shit. An absolute monster. It feels like, okay, yeah, we'll just let you play the bosses, but the bosses are ballistic and nuts. Oh, you got cheesed, buddy. Your ass got cheesed. Was sick of him. Sick of seeing his one-eyed face. Other than that, not much changes to fight as, but this is like one of the most minor upgrades in the series. The problem with Champion Edition is that it is rendered effectively pointless because you get the next version, which is Turbo/Hyper Fighting. So we wanted to check out the SNES version, and the SNES version is once again an absolutely wonderful port. Funny enough, it's the port in Street Fighter 2 Turbo because Champion Edition didn't show up on Super Nintendo. Champion Edition is the one that a lot of people played on Genesis, which does also have like a Turbo selection available. But the SNES version lets you choose the original, and in the original, it plays just like Champion Edition in arcades. You just get the 4 characters, right? And it's the same relative game, plays kind of similar to Street Fighter 2. And from what I can understand, Balrog will not jump over fireballs. right? He just gets fucked by this stuff. He jumped over the fireball. He jumped over it again. My strategy. But then you can switch it to turbo, which is amazing. And I'm still blown away by how good the ports, especially from Street Fighter 2 to even Street Fighter 2 Turbo, are. Because technically Street Fighter 2 Turbo has 2 arcade games in it. And those games, from what we played, play very similar to the arcade counterparts that we were messing around with. The SNES version's no joke, man. Cheap! However, the AI is pretty much doing the same shit that it does in the arcade. So this is a really good port. Again, the Super Nintendo versions of Street Fighter games are actually quite good. The Genesis version, it's rough. We've played it a few times in Yo Video Games, and it's crunchy as shit. The sound effects are brutal. A lot of people didn't have 6-button Genesis controllers. So that's not a great version of the game. The Genesis was doing everything it possibly could, but it was clear that the hero system for these home ports between, obviously, Street Fighter 2 and Street Fighter 2 Turbo are on the Super Nintendo, and the Super Nintendo's got some great ports of these games. It doesn't get really fun until you get to Hyper Fighting, aka Street Fighter 2 Turbo, aka this thing. Champion Edition, yes, because technically Street Fighter 2 Turbo had Champion Edition in it. It was also called Hyper Fighting in Japan, and it's Turbo. This is so confusing, right? This is the most confusing shit in the world that they did this. But all you really need to realize is that base SF2, and then you had the one with the bosses, which was Champion Edition, and then you have Turbo, which adds all the crazy gameplay adjustments and speed, and it feels like actually like, you know, a Street Fighter game. So upon playing upon playing Turbo, you immediately realize how different it is. And it isn't just the new moves that characters get, like the Shotos get jumping Tatsus and stuff like that. The most interesting part is seeing what the CPU does. And the CPU starts hitting you with some dank shit, and it's like, whoa, what is going on? Hey, man! What the fuck? Wow! I literally just got restunned by the computer. This is a game where I can do all these like fun as shit combos now, and the computer will not have any of it. The difficulty significantly ramps up, the speed of the game ramps up, and now this is playing a bit more like you remember Street Fighter playing, because when you go back to Champion Edition or old school Street Fighter 2, they really do just play kind of clunky and slow. And then you get Hyper Fighting, and it is fully realized why people like this version of the game a ton. There it was. Dickhead. Dickhead. I am literally doing the same thing he is. Holy shit! Of all the old school hardcore players that love Street Fighter 2 classics, the ones that stood the test of time was Hyper Fighting, and obviously, as we'll play later, Super Turbo. And yes, Hyper Fighting is great. It's fun as shit. I'm reminded of all the reasons I enjoyed playing it and grinded the hell out of it on Xbox 360, because it does respond good, and most of the characters get more things than they had before. So, you know, it's funny, right? Most fighting games will ramp up and give you more things to do, and that's exactly what this did back in the day. But that isn't the end of the story. Because even between all these different versions of the game that existed on consoles and the arcade, there was finally a parity, right? Genesis and SNES were sporadic. The Genesis didn't get Street Fighter 2 for a while. It didn't get it until its quote-unquote special Champion Edition. But the arcade version of Super Street Fighter 2, the new Challengers, shows up, and then it shows up a bit later on the consoles, and this is the one that I also got on Genesis and was really excited about it. This is where I learned how to throw fireballs and, you know, do dragon punches and stuff, and my fingers bled on that Genesis pad. But there was a parody where the SNES and Genesis were both getting Super Street Fighter 2 at the exact same time. And it looks really good on consoles once again, right? However, there's a problem. The gameplay is booty butt cheeks. Uh-oh, can't slide under fireballs? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. That's bad. That's really bad. Dude, do I not have up kicks? What the fuck? Oh my god. No wonder he's so bad. He literally can't stop people from jumping at him. Oh no, oh god, does Fei Long also? Oh my god, Fei Long doesn't have chicken wing and DJ doesn't have up kicks? Wow, characters are missing some shit in this game. So there's a lot of other great things that come out of Super Street Fighter 2 outside of the rough gameplay. And there is a complete visual overhaul of the whole experience. Street Fighter 2 has now transcended into something that might actually be worth your money going forward, because not only are there new characters, there's a whole bunch of new visuals, there's new stages, there's more colors per character, there's a new UI, and in the arcades, they go from the old CPS-1 hardware straight into CPS-2. So now there is a proper upgrade to Street Fighter that might be worth it to some people. The reason I mention this is this goes down as one of the most hated versions of Street Fighter 2, which is funny considering that so much around it is upgraded in pedigree compared to the previous game. And yeah, audio-wise, visually, like everything you look at when you play this game is like awesome. And you get it, because so much of this would carry over to Super Turbo. However, it is the worst game to play of all of them. I think I'd rather play Street Fighter 2, right? I no shit would prefer to go back to SF2 like bare bones than to play through what I just played through with Super Street Fighter 2 all over again. At least the home console ports allow you to change the speed of the game a little bit, but not the arcade version, not the base version that most people complain about. Super SF2 is brutally slow, man. Fuck, input reading piece of shit. Listen to watch it all happen in extreme slow motion, right? And I am just not a fan of it. It feels like we're playing something that wants you to be more precise with your inputs, and obviously is focusing on combos because the combo counter is added, right? All these wonderful accoutrements that would eventually make Street Fighter 2 like the best version of the game later on are here, but it doesn't matter because the game's just not fun. And even the new characters, it's shocking to go back and play a character like DJ and he doesn't have up kicks. It blows my mind to play a character like Fei Long and he just doesn't have chicken wing. To play a character like Cammy and there's no hooligan, and all of it's playing so slow and at the absolute pace of a snail that I'm getting bored to tears as Zangief is avoiding every single thing I'm doing and being a complete asshole about it. So it's funny, I have a lot of good memories of Super Street Fighter 2 on the Genesis because of what I learned with the game. And maybe I cranked up the speed, I can't really tell you, or do I remember because I was like 9 years old or something like that. But upon retrospective, we played through a couple of versions of Street Fighter 2 that are absolutely redundant and essentially useless, in my opinion now. Champion Edition is rendered useless because of Hyper Fighting / Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Later on, and as we go forward, Super Turbo renders Super Street Fighter 2 just useless. But it does have something that's amazing. Something that is probably better than any other version of a Capcom fighting game, I think, to this day. Super Street Fighter 2 introduces the classic Ryu posing and him throwing a fireball into the camera intro. And in my opinion, this is, no kidding, one of the best looking intros ever in an old game. I love it, man. It still goes down as one of my favorite intros of all time. #1 for fighting games. But its attract screen brings you in so hard because the character is huge, bobbing up and down. Oh my god, man. And they recreated that on the console versions as well. So it was great to see that, like, all these things, like there was, once again, clearly a visual upgrade. But talking about Street Fighter at this point, just in terms of my overall perspective, by the time Super Street Fighter 2 happened, this franchise was not in a good place. And the reason it wasn't was because the home ports of Street Fighter 2, people were buying Street Fighter 2, and they were buying Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and they were also buying the Genesis Championship Edition, right? There was a level of oversaturation that started to happen very early on because these games were not cheap. Capcom was charging people $70 to $80 for their arcade ports because having an arcade game at home was one of the most valuable things you could have back in the 90s. So Capcom was making mad bank, and Street Fighter 2 sold the best of all of them, but Street Fighter 2 Turbo also sold a shit ton. And it effectively rendered, for a lot of people, Street Fighter 2 kind of useless, because it is great, and it is probably the best version of Street Fighter 2 on the Super Nintendo. But people were not ready to cough up more money, and even though a lot of this stuff was upgraded visually, any quirks with gameplay, anyway, like there's a downgrade in how it plays, people just went back to Street Fighter 2 Turbo. People went back to Hyper Fighting. And this is where all the memes happen. Well, what's the next Capcom game? You're gonna get Street Fighter EX2 plus Alpha Arcade Edition Hyper Neptuna Blast. This meme started in literally the 90s and was in jokes everywhere. Everyone made this joke on the playground. They made these jokes in gaming magazines, right? This was just forever. And it still goes to this day because it's true. Capcom was milking the shit out of this franchise. And funny enough, this is kind of where the goodwill sort of ends, because the next version of Street Fighter that we go into, Super Turbo, doesn't technically get a home port outside of the friggin' 3DO, and doesn't eventually make its way to home consoles until the PlayStation 1. And weirdly enough, has been remade technically 4 times over the past like 25, 30 years. So next time we're going to check out Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo and see all the different versions of the game and all the ways it's changed for the past like 30 years.